Okay, we are live whenever everybody is ready.
And I believe we have everyone here. No? Yes, we do. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special council meeting of February 16th, 2021. We're here this evening to receive a special delegation regarding the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, specifically Ladysmith Edition. So before we begin, I'd like to recognize our meeting is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Staminas people. And with that, we'll get underway. Are there any changes or additions to our one-item agenda this evening?
No, Your Worship. However, I don't see our delegation in the waiting room. So we'll just try and reach them.
Oh, they're not here yet.
They're not here.
Okay, so we'll wait for them for a moment and see if we can get them, because there's no point in adopting the agenda if not.
Your Worship, utilizing your technical skills, I have got a sidebar here of the chat, which I can't get rid of. Hence, my screen is only about 2/3 regular size. How do I get rid of the chat after I've looked at it?
At the top of the chat window, there's that little arrow to the left of the word chat. Click on it and then click close.
There's an arrow down.
Yeah, click on it.
I've hit that a couple times, nothing happens.
No, when you click on it with your mouse, at least it should give you the option to close it.
Okay.
I don't know if I tap on it with my finger. You're right. Oh, there it goes. I tapped it and it did come up close.
Okay.
I just had to tap around it.
Okay. Close. Thank you.
No worries. So we'll wait just a couple more minutes here. Usually if we can't have our delegation within 5 minutes, we move on, but we don't have anything else on this agenda. So
Your Worship, I believe they are just on their way. They were presenting in Duncan, so hopefully they'll be joining us very quickly. I just spoke to one of the party.
Okay. All right. We'll just wait patiently. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Worship, may I ask a couple questions of staff while we're waiting?
I don't think that's appropriate. We are streaming live right now, so I would just wait until the
Thank
meeting's
you.
actually.
I accept.
Your worship, it looks like Mr. Parker is available now. I think we're just waiting for John Horn, but I can bring Mr. Parker into the meeting.
Yeah, I would see if we could do that.
Yeah.
So while we're getting Mr. Parker into the meeting, we can approve our agenda. It's just the one item this evening, and that's the presentation from GP Rollo Associates on the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And if I can get a motion to adopt the agenda, Councillor Mackay, seconded by Councillor Stevens. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. So we're moving right down to our delegation. And welcome, Mr. Parker.
Hi, it's good to be here. Pardon the delay. We were a little late getting out of Duncan, and then it was an unusual little registration process. So my apologies. I assume John is still figuring it out, but that's okay because I will deliver my part of the presentation, and hopefully, if that gives, hopefully that'll give John enough time to catch up. First of all, can everyone hear me? Is the audio getting through? Excellent. Great. So I assume I will share my screen now.
Yep. Welcome. Okay. And council, if possible, maybe because of the full screen presentation, just write your questions down. We'll save them to the end because we are mindful that we have a regular council meeting starting at 7 p.m. as well. Great.
So here's what's going to happen. Normally, we would do John's section first, followed by mine. So we're going to do that in reverse, and that should give John some time, but some things may be a little out of context. So I'll share my screen now. Okay, and presentation mode. That should look good. Is that correct?
Right now we're seeing your full interface, not just the presentation.
Oh, okay, this happened last time too. Let me just so, I guess I'll stop the sharing and try again. Okay, how's that?
That's good. Thank you.
Excellent. Sorry again about that delay. So I am now going to
John Horn is now in the meeting.
Thank you. Yes, there's some technical glitches there getting on. I appreciate that. Your patience.
Okay.
Thank
So
you
you're just in time, John. We're on the first slide.
very good.
Do you want to pick it up from the top?
Yes, thank you. And I'm sure you've introduced yourself already.
I haven't actually. I haven't.
Okay.
Go on.
Well, thank you for having us here tonight. I'm John Horn with the Cowichan Housing Association, and I'm here with George Parker from the GP Rollo and Associates, my colleague in the housing needs assessment world. And we're here to present some of the findings and some of our conclusions from the housing needs assessment for the town of Ladysmith. I wanted to start by acknowledging that most of the work of doing these housing needs assessments took place on the traditional territories of the First Nations in the region. And that's, of course, the Cowichan tribes and the Dididat First Nation, the Halalt, Layaxan, Malahat, Penelakut, Cheminis, Subatsit, Pakachan, and others. And we're especially grateful to the housing staff from those First Nations who helped us in the work of preparing these reports. Thanks, George. Next slide. In addition to those folks, of course, we consulted with a wide range of people. 257 members of the community participated, and we spoke to over 33 organizations along the way and did a number of in-depth interviews with them. And we also want to thank them for their participation. Thanks. Next slide, please, George. This presentation today focuses on the town of Ladysmith, of course, but it is nestled within the context of the broader CBRD, both the housing needs assessment that speaks to the region and those for the electoral areas and the other municipalities within the CBRD. But tonight's focus is the town of Ladysmith. So next slide, thanks, George. Two types of findings. Our qualitative findings are really drawn from the community engagement process we went through, and I'll explain those in a minute. But just to say that we drew from those qualitative interviews certain conclusions and findings, and we'll share those with you. And then there's the quantitative side of the equation, more data and methodology. and projections derived from those, and George will be in charge of that department. So thanks for the next slide. The community engagement process we went through, we did several things. We did a place speak questionnaire, and that's about 250 people responded to that and participated in the questionnaire. We did 3 virtual cafes, and they had a theme. One was economy and housing, and families and youth and housing, and then health and housing. So each community cafe had a theme, and we had a number of attendees from organizations and levels of government at those. And we did stakeholder interviews with about 33 organizations, asking them a lot of questions about the housing needs of the clients they serve or the people that they see. And naturally, of course, we spoke with the housing managers at 8 of the First Nations in our community and interviewed them extensively about the housing needs within their jurisdictions as well. So that's the process of community engagement. And the next slide, thanks, George. A couple of key themes came out specifically in terms of Ladysmith. One finding, or one thing that was clear from talking to everybody, was that more apartments are needed in Ladysmith, and 1-bedroom apartments in particular are most in need. The housing stock in Ladysmith is older than the CVRD average, and anyone who drives through Ladysmith knows you have a lot of beautiful classic homes there. But it does mean that the houses are older and more upkeep is required, and that has implications for the price and the affordability of homes in the area. Ladysmith, like other parts of Canada and BC, continue to attract an aging population. And they do come to places like Ladysmith because amenities and services are close at hand. It's a dense, tightly knit community and fairly accessible. So people will move from larger rural properties to a place in town, so to speak, and Ladysmith is the recipient of that kind of growth. With that comes a slightly older age cohort than might be seen across the CVRD. No surprise that younger generations have housing challenges. Finding housing is one challenge, affording it is another. And for the younger people coming into the workforce or starting out in life, it can be quite daunting to even to rent, never mind buy a home. So that's a key piece that emerged from our discussions. There's not a lot of purpose-built rental, and that's true of Ladysmith as much as it is of any part of the region, if not more so. And so really that's probably the crux for renters in the community, is that the rental stock's quite informal and not a lot of apartment buildings to go to. So next slide, thanks, George. This is no surprise that housing costs are misaligned with wages. That's true probably across BC. And certainly on Vancouver Island, that the house prices for renting and for owning are shooting up faster than wages are. I think we can all attest to that. And there's a misalignment which has serious repercussions for people's ability to afford housing in this region. One thing that's been noted from our interviews with First Nations staff is that while there is housing available in the broader community off the reserves, that this is not necessarily culturally appropriate or a good fit for First Nations families and for individuals. So that was noted in our discussions with them. Families, of course, struggle. If you think it's expensive to rent a 1-bedroom apartment, try a 3-bedroom home, and you'll find that that's really tough. Renter households typically have lower incomes as well, so they're in a double bind. It costs a lot to rent a house big enough to feed a family or to house a big family, and they typically have a lower income at their disposal than owner households would. There is a need for non-market housing options. I believe on your agenda tonight is an exploration of that very thing. And as you know, there is a population within your community who are not able to access market housing for a variety of reasons, and non-market housing is likely the best response to their housing needs. So more of those will be needed as we go down the road, and probably at the moment there's probably a pretty strong demand that outstrips supply of non-market housing options in Ladysmith. Key findings by population. You're kind of the northern collection point in the CVRD as a sort of city center. And so you do have a collection of homeless people in your community, as you know. And so that's a piece that's distinct from some of the other smaller jurisdictions. You do have that area of attraction, and you will have that housing issue associated with that. This is a truism for youth as well, who come into the housing market with very low incomes typically. And the special needs of youth around developmental needs or their educational needs or their support needs, they're a bit higher than the average adult renter. So non-market housing for youth needs to take that into account. And so does housing for youth in generic housing that seeks to house youth. Newcomers into the community, they often come with larger families, demographically speaking, and low incomes. For them to successfully make the transition into our communities, housing is a key part of that, and it is a struggle for newcomers to afford housing, as I say, particularly when they bring a lot of children or extended family with them. It becomes a struggle to pay the rent. People with special needs, of course, benefit from services and supports that are typically found in the city center. So housing for those folks to be close to those services is key. Transportation is an issue for many of them. So housing with special needs is something that we wanted to pay attention to for Ladysmith. And really workforce housing, this is true across the region, but true of every municipality as well. If you want a vibrant economy and things to grow, then you need to have a place for workers to live. And when they come to your community and they can't find a place to rent or a house they can afford, it becomes daunting for them and daunting for employers to find employees in that context. So workforce housing is a key to sustaining economic growth in Ladysmith. And that sort of is a summary in some cases of what we heard from the findings. Next slide, George. What I would do now is I'll leave that subjective sort of broad brush analysis, and I'll turn you over to the capable hands of my friend George Parker from GP Rollo, who will go through the rest of the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John. So as part of the housing needs assessment, we were required to process a great deal of data from the 2006, 2011, and 2016 censuses. The government of BC provided a custom data set specifically for this purpose. The data in this data set might differ from other census data you've seen because it excludes individuals outside of private households, for example, people living in care homes. This government-sanctioned data set is used throughout this research in the interest of consistency. We don't have time to cover all of the background research, so this is a curated selection. This graph shows the rate of population growth of BC, the CVRD, and Ladysmith in the last 5 years in teal and in the last 10 years in green. Now, when I say the last 10 years or the last 5 years, I mean from the perspective of the 2016 census. So this shows growth over the decade from 2006 to 2016. We will typically be comparing these three jurisdictions unless otherwise indicated. Between 2006 and 2016, BC grew in population from about 4.1 million to about 4.6 million. That's 12% growth. The CVRD grew from 75,000 to 82,000. That's 8% growth. And Ladysmith grew from 7,400 to about 8,400, which is 13% growth. So the region grew about 2/3 at the pace of the province, but the town grew a little faster than the province. So in the context of the CVRD, Ladysmith is showed quite a lot of growth in this decade. This graph shows the share of households that rent over time. From 2006 to 2016, renters as a share of all households in BC increased slightly, from about 30% to about 32%. A smaller share of households in the CVRD are renters, but the same upward trend is present, from about 20% to about 22%. Ladysmith has a slightly lower share of renters than the region, which began and ended the decade at 19%. This graph shows median household income in each jurisdiction over time. The CVRD was slightly less affluent than BC throughout this decade. Ladysmith began the decade just a little less affluent than the region and ended the decade just a little more affluent. From 2006 to 2016, median household income increased from 62,000 to 70,000 in BC, from 60 to 65 in the CVRD, and from 59 to 68,000 in Ladysmith. But the above figures are nominal figures that include inflation. If you account for inflation, you see, which is shown here, you see that median household income in BC stagnated from 76 to 75. In the CVRD, it declined from 73 to 70, whereas in Ladysmith, it managed to increase slightly from 72 to 73,000. These figures are in constant 2019 dollars. This graph shows household income distribution in BC on the left versus Ladysmith on the right. Each of these columns is an income group, an income range of about $10,000. This just gives you a sense of what income distribution tends to look like. The main difference here is that Ladysmith is slightly less affluent than the province, but also has less income inequality. You can tell, at least in 2016, because BC has more people in the lowest income and highest income groups compared to Ladysmith. This is a similar comparison between owner households in Ladysmith and renter households in Ladysmith. For the sake of reference, in 2016, owner households in the district had a district of Ladysmith, that is, had a median income of $76,000, while renter households had a median income of $51,000. So owner households had about 50% more income than renter households in Ladysmith. This slide explores that very statistic. The solid teal bar shows owner household income. The hatch teal bar shows renter household income, and the green bar shows their ratio. A higher green bar means owners and renters are more unequal. By this measure, the CVRD exhibits slightly more inequality between tenure groups than BC generally, and Ladysmith is somewhere between the two. This slide compares BC to Ladysmith with respect to bedroom counts. In BC, there were about an even split between 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and 4-bedroom units, about 27% each in 2016, with fewer 1-bedroom units and even fewer studios. Whereas in Ladysmith, 3-bedroom units predominate, more than 40%, followed by 2-bedroom and 4-bedroom units, and very few 1-bedroom units, less than 6%. Statistics Canada defines 3 types of housing standard. They are suitability, meaning that the dwelling is not overcrowded and has an adequate number of bedrooms. In BC, the share of all households falling below the suitability standard decreased from 2006 to 2016 compared to
Your Worship, through you, Your Worship, we have just a few more minutes left before we need to go into our open meeting. We could start it a tiny bit late, but just wanted to let you know.
I can skip ahead a bit.
All right, thank you. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. The problem's on our end too. So I'm gonna skip to this slide. This is an estimate that we got from Environics Analytics of the distribution of household incomes in Ladysmith in 2019. We had to use 2019 data from a separate source because the most recent census data is from 2016. But as you can see, it's a similar shaped curve and it's fairly coherent with the census data. This is data on the price of housing excluding purpose-built rental. So this is the price of homes that could be purchased in Ladysmith in 2019, according to the census, BC assessment data. As you can see, it's a bell curve. If we combine these two, we get a graph of how household incomes compare to housing costs for owners in Ladysmith. Each of these lines is a separate jurisdiction. If we isolate Ladysmith, we get this one here. So as income increases, housing costs increase, but not as fast. According to this calculation, owner households with mortgages making less than about $50,000 per year would be expected to spend more than 30% of their income on housing in Ladysmith, which is about 16% of owners, which is slightly higher than in the 2006 to 2016 period. If you do the same analysis for renters, once again, you can see that the lower your income is, the more likely it is that you're above that 30% black line or that 50% red line. And all in all, about 35% of renter households spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and more than 11% spend more than 50% of their income on housing. If you throw renters and owners into the same pool, it's about 19% of Ladysmith households that are in core housing need, which is in line with historical trends. I can comment on the projections, and I'm happy to do so, but I don't think we have time. So I will simply say that Ladysmith is projected to grow from about 3,800 households in 2019 to about 4,400 in 2025, which is about 13% growth, which would be somewhat faster than seen during the census period. We also have population rising even faster as we project, or rather Rennie projects that household size is going to increase from about 2.28 to 2.31 per household. This is an important point that I'm not going to talk to, but basically if you notice in the housing needs report that it looks like we're calling for a lot of one-bedroom units to be constructed is not the correct interpretation of this data. This actually defines the minimum number of bedrooms to avoid overcrowding. Many households need only one bedroom, according to that strict definition set down by Statistics Canada. This doesn't mean that only one bedroom unit should be constructed for the next 6 years. It simply means that this would what you'd need to construct if you wanted to avoid overcrowding. The housing needs assessment required this calculation, but it's not a very relevant calculation for a community where overcrowding is not a significant issue. And Ladysmith is an example of that. We have a projection of household income. In summary, real incomes are expected to go up by about $4,000 per household per year in the high income scenario, fast recovery scenario we developed, and they're expected to decline slightly by about $1,000 per household per year in the slow recovery scenario. The recovery is with respect to COVID, to be clear. And that is a speedy version of the presentation.
Thank you very much. And I apologize. It's just that we do have a scheduled meeting at 7 o'clock. We thought by having this special meeting specifically for this topic, it would help us have the time to have the discussion. But unfortunately, technology and schedules don't always lead us to where we wanted to be. But I'm thankful that you covered that last point around the bedrooms, because the interpretation could be, oh, let's just build one bedrooms, right?
Yeah.
But you're talking about those many families who dedicate their extra bedrooms to other uses, that have the income and ability and desire to own a larger home, but only need a one bedroom.
Yes.
So I appreciate that that clarification, because that was one of the things that seems to have stuck out to some folks.
Well, it's unfortunate because the requirements of a housing needs assessment are defined by the government. So we had to report on it. But what it really reflects is how to avoid a certain kind of crisis rather than necessarily a best practice. These aren't, or in other words, these are not the ideal number of bedrooms. These are the minimum number of bedrooms. And I will go further and say that this is not a housing demand study, but a housing needs study. And that's the distinction.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I do want to, we can go a little bit over 7 o'clock, but I really wanted to give opportunities to council to ask some questions. So I would open the floor up to questions of either John or George. I'll start with Marsh. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say a blanket thank you. I've looked at all the slides with great interest, and I find it really fascinating, and I think it's going to help us in our upcoming OCP review. Just on that point of bedrooms versus bedrooms in the definition, is it possible to parse out in a supplementary exercise appropriate housing versus gross numbers? Or is that an OCP exercise?
I would say it's an OCP exercise. I will say this, that what's defined here is, again, the minimum number for a household of a certain size. And it's not very useful from a planning perspective because most households want more bedrooms and more size than and they can afford to do so. Most households can do better. But the question of exactly what the right size is comes down to a whole variety of planning objectives, which are not really the place of this document to comment on. It comes down to what type and mix and affordability level the OCP is aiming for.
Mm-hmm.
And I
the
can't
densities,
really
I
comment
think
on
that yeah, for purpose-built rental, for example, that high density is the ticket to affordability. So a lot of it depends on your form as well that you're shooting for, the type of housing, whether it be apartment buildings or single family homes. So
yeah. Thank you. Go ahead. I have Councillor Jacobson and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Did it come up in your studies at all that perhaps there was a bit of a clog up of 2 and 3 bedroom units because people weren't moving into 1 bedroom units? Like, I'm wondering if people could downsize, if you were finding that people were able to downsize, but maybe they were rent has increased past the point where they're like, why would I rent a 2 bedroom when I can rent a 3 bedroom for less? Did that come up at all?
Did you hear anything like that, John?
No, I haven't heard anything like that. The only comment was that people begin to want to diminish their house size as they get older and the maintenance needs start to press upon them. And that's probably more what I've heard is older housing stock. It just gets expensive and difficult to maintain as you age. And that's where part of the pressure to move to smaller, less maintenance heavy units, which would be the form again. So that's a
Right. And sorry, what my line of thinking is with that is maybe if there were more smaller, like
Yeah.
you were saying, like 1 and 2 bedroom units, perhaps that would open up the, kind of the property cycle, I
Mhm.
guess.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
also
that
just
housing continuum, right? As they move into
Yes,
smaller
exactly.
family.
it's also just a question of basic economics. Smaller units are cheaper to build and they're less desirable, and that makes them more affordable.
Yeah.
So smaller units, focusing on them with planning
Affordable.
tools is generally a good way to improve affordability.
Mhm.
In addition to which, it actually can improve the economics. It can fitting more units into and therefore smaller units into a particular parcel can actually the development community may like that, right? It's not necessarily a win-lose situation. It could be a win-win situation.
Okay, thank you. Amanda, follow up?
Yeah, and then my next question was, from this information, how far, who do you provide this information to? Like what other levels of government does this just go downward to municipalities, or does it go to the province? Does it go to the feds? I'm wondering if you provide this to CMHC, anything like that?
It's a provincial government requirement to produce this report. So this is for the province, but I would put it through on any other avenues where this report will go.
And what I would
Thank you.
say in support of that is that when we go advocating for housing needs within the community to BC Housing and CMHC, they will be using these housing needs assessments as the data sets that we, drive our demands, so to speak. So we at least can point to something that says, here's the needs of the housing for this town. And so I think that'll be a big assist for us. It's not that they land with it and go, geez, we should do something in Ladysmith. It's that we now get to go beat the provincial government over the head with your housing needs in a more formal way than we could have in the past. So it's going to be an effective advocacy tool, I think, is what it should be really for us.
And it goes up to CMHC. I'm just curious how it lands in their policy-making decision, because we've seen them tightening up quite a bit with first-time buyers, particularly in the last couple of years.
I don't think it will land at CMHC in a way that changes their policy. Again, it'll be an advocacy tool for communities that
Gotcha.
you'll have to go and push it to them that this is what we need. Here's the data set that supports our demands. Or we won't say their demands, we'll say their asks, but in a polite way. But really, if you want to go get money from CMHC and BC Housing, you need good advocacy, and this is a good advocacy tool. I would think is the best way to phrase that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll go to Duck last. Mindful that we're already 3 minutes past our start time for our regular meeting, but if we can just get in and out, we'll get that done.
I noticed you had different slides than some of the ones we had.
That's so?
Pardon?
I didn't know that. Go on.
It's different than what I've got.
Okay, I believe you.
It is.
Would it be possible for each of us to get a copy of what you presented tonight? And so the stuff that you skipped over?
Mhm.
Sure.
Okay, and I did have some questions on transit and some of the percentages, but if we sent our questions to staff, they could get them to you?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was kind of hoping for an answer to what is your opinion on how to achieve this? But I'll leave that for because that's a big discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a longer discussion.
Yeah.
And we may want to bring this back to a committee of the whole meeting and be able to actually dissect it a little bit more. Maybe we'll be inviting John and George back sometime.
That'd be great. Yeah, we'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
I echo that sentiment.
Yeah, no, it would be, because I think it's a more full discussion. And I think that was our intent, but all the best laid plans, right?
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I like, again, not just for the presentation, but for the work, because yes, it's a need that we have that we need to deliver to the province, but it is really important information as we move forward. So I want to thank you both for all the work, all the engagement with the communities, and for the report. And have a feeling you'll be hearing from us soon, and we'll be discussing more detail very soon.
Look
Great.
forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Very much. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Have a
Night.
good night. So, Ms. Smith, as we proceed to regular meeting, we're just going to keep going.
Your worship, the part of this presentation, council does need to receive the presentation.
So I'll ask for a motion to receive the presentation. Moved by Councillors Patterson and Mackay. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries.
And then your worship, we'll adjourn the special open meeting and then we'll just start the regular meeting.
Okay, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Stevens, seconded by Councillor Mackay. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. So we are out of that meeting, and then we'll roll right in to our regularly scheduled council meeting for today, February 16th, 2021. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Staminas people. And with that, we will get underway. Is there any changes to the agenda this evening?
Yes, your worship. Since the publication of the agenda, we have received a few more pieces of correspondence regarding item 6.1, item 6.1, the temporary use permit. So if council would receive those items of correspondence, it would not be any different decision. You'd just be adding it to the existing correspondence on the agenda. So the items are from the Old Town Bakery, Bliss Yoga, Andrea Rosado Taylor, and Brooke Mycroft.
Thank you. So we'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda with those additions under 6.1. Moved by Councillor Jacobson, seconded by Councillor Virtanen. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. And that is it for our agenda approval. No items to rise with report yet. Ms. Smith, I believe we will have to go back into closed session because we did not adjourn or pass a motion on rise with report. So we'll do that after our open session. Moving on then to minutes. This is minutes of the regular council meeting held February 2nd, 2021. If there are no errors or omissions, if we can have a motion to adopt the minutes. Moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Stevens. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Councillor Johnson, are you here or you just got your video shut off? Oh, there he is. Okay, I just making sure you're just eating, you're catching the rest of your supper. Sorry, I just wasn't sure if I was just moving on without you. Okay, you can turn your camera off if you wish, that's fine. Okay, we're moving on then. We're on development applications, so we're all the way down to item 6.1. The temporary use permit for, sorry, I've got to move some screens around here. The temporary shelter at 440 First Avenue, also the Island Hotel. The motion recommendation from staff is that council approve the issuance of the temporary use permit 3340-21-01 for a temporary shelter to support persons experiencing homelessness for the duration of COVID-19 pandemic at 440 First Avenue, Lot 6, Block 27, District Lot 56, Oyster District, Plan 703, PID 008-550-981. And so we will begin our deliberations. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. This one is going to be, I hope everybody's had the opportunity of reading all the letters. And so this is, and I appreciate the support that I got from staff and some of the discussions I had with staff. But this is, I'm going to have to read this. And first of all, Island Health, their strategic direction, in collaboration with our many valued partners and in alignment with government strategic direction, Island Health is transforming the health system to better meet the needs of the people we serve and support our vision of excellent health and care for everyone, everywhere, every time. And the BC Housing values forward thinking, because we want to see the way ahead and build solutions for the future. So we are creative, adaptive, and flexible. Client focused, because we want to benefit people's lives and our communities. So we are fair, respectful, and understanding. That's the mission, I guess the cornerstones of those two organizations, which will tie into the statement that I'm going to read now. And I believe totally that the individuals that we are discussing, the need of these individuals is very, very important. And I have compassion for them. But this is by no means even a small fix. There is a much larger picture here, which I've expressed to council before. But right now there is a need for these people to be housed where they're safe and warm. This location is not where it is the right location. And the length of time being requested is not the right length of time. The amount of time and notice that was given for a public input was not adequate, in my opinion. At the BC Housing Public Information Meeting last Wednesday, less than a week before we're to make a decision, they put an hour limit on it. One viewer had just received notice that day of the application. Something that has potential for huge impact on our downtown business community needs more than an hour of consultation. I had questions that I wanted to ask. There were questions by other people that were not answered. The lady from our LRCA, when asked about the length of the permit, said she believed it was for 1 year. If she's not sure how much of the other stuff is for sure. I had asked about the staffing and she said that the staff will be there, have been trained. I had asked if there was professional staff and again was told that the staff being used were all from LRCA and they are trained. And I'm trained in first aid, but that doesn't make me a nurse, a paramedic, or anybody else that is a professional. And the mandate of BC Housing and VI Health is to look after the health and well-being of the area's homeless. Then why isn't this request being asked for at the old hospital, the Ladysmith Healthcare Unit? At one time, it was a hospital. This is has all the services that BC Housing and LRCA say that would be needed at the Island Hotel. There is bathroom facilities, more than what would be available at the Island Hotel. There is shower facilities and cooking facilities. There's laundry. According to their website, the health unit offers youth and family substance use services and adult mental health and addiction. There are doctors there and medical treatment beds, if any would be required. The LRCA would still have an opportunity for their staff to be involved. Having a temporary homeless shelter there will probably cause the same feelings that this application has caused by the neighbors, but for me, it's a bit of an easier pill to swallow than kicking our downtown merchants and residents while they are still down. Our downtown area, our whole community is starting on the second year of COVID, and with all the restrictions that it entails. And before that, our business community went through an 8-month strike. So now we're asking them, and I am a pessimist, and maybe casting some of these people in a bad light, but if you have been watching TV, listening to the news, reading newspapers for over the past 2 years, there is a lot of evidence of what these unfortunate people, some of them, but the people that go hang around with them are causing in other downtown areas. I got off my subject. So I'm just going to cut it short. I personally would like to table this discussion and get BC Housing and Island Health to sit down and come up with a plan that would work in that location as a temporary use. And then if that passes, I would like to make a motion that we send to UBCM to address the bigger picture. I am totally in agreement that we need to look after the homeless population, especially right now in this weather. That location is, the proposed location is not the location. An overall provincial location is ideal, but I believe the healthcare unit at 4th and Simons has all the proper food groups. And look at the huge piece of property it has that these people would have the advantage of enjoying instead of sitting out on the sidewalks or the back alley of the Island Hotel. And look at the money that we have just had all sorts of community groups donate for picnic tables and lights, etc., to enhance our downtown. I know it's sounding like, well, he's just down and out about homeless people because some of them look really bad, etc., etc. I am sorry, but that is what everybody is seeing nowadays. So I'm going to leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Councillor Virtanen, then Stevens, then Jacobson. Councillor Virtanen.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to come at this from a little different angle than Councillor Patterson did. Look, dealing with homelessness, it's a hugely complex issue. So many moving parts, lots of competing ideas. It's not a surprise it's taking so long for us to kind of, well, really honestly start dealing with it. But you know what? Whenever I'm trying to solve something, I try to cut through all the noise. And so if we cut through everything, there's really actually two simple choices that we have to make. We either do something about homelessness or we don't. And it is actually that simple. And quite honestly, Ladysmith forever did nothing. And I'm not bashing Ladysmith for that. Lots of communities did the same thing. We just kind of, as long as they were out of sight and they didn't make a mess, we kind of pretended they didn't exist. But for Ladysmith, that all changed. It all changed on January 14th, 2013. A lot of us know Dave Alton. A lot of us, I had beers with him at the Islander. He graduated here. I actually looked up some older articles to find out. I think he graduated in 65. He was a well-known character around town. Anyways, he had some bad luck and maybe also made some not the best life choices. But he found himself kicked out of the Rialto one night. And he went down and slept in the Aggie dugout and he froze to death. He died. And I was here. I remember that. And quite honestly, it punched us in the mouth as a community. And I believe strongly that this community at that time made up its mind that it was now going to do something. This wasn't, some drifter from God knows where that came through and came to an untimely demise. This was one of our own, right? And I honestly believe that we decided that we were going to do something. When I was looking up some of the old articles, Bruce Mason, who we were just talking about when we were talking about Holland Creek Crossing, he was quoted in the Chronicle at the time. And his quote, I'm going to read it, "It's tragic, it shouldn't have happened, and hopefully it will never happen to anyone else in town." And Bruce wasn't alone in those sentiments. I don't know, maybe you can tell me I'm wrong, but I believe that we made a choice that we were going to do something. And we proved it, right? All of a sudden we ended up with an extreme weather shelter, now into a cold weather shelter, right? And now because of the pandemic, we had a temporary tent site over on Buller. So basically, that's led us to where we are tonight. And we're being asked, and let's not forget this too, what we're actually being asked to do. We're being asked to issue a temporary use permit to allow up to 15 of our homeless to have a warm and safe place to sleep. Now, sorry it took me a little bit to get here, but I think that history is important. There's other social justice movements that say their name. I think we can't forget Dangerous Dave Alton here, okay? Because this is how it started. So this is not like we're like, oh, if we don't do anything, this could happen. No, guess what? We didn't do anything and something did happen. We can actually show that it did happen. And so basically, do we temporarily allow our homeless to sleep in an abandoned bar? And my answer is going to be yes. From the options that BC Housing studied and the LRCA and what they gave us, And I totally agree with Councillor Patterson. I don't think the Islander is a perfect long-term solution, not at all. But I do think as a temporary one, I don't know, I'm going to support, because, you know, I'm going to be honest here, right? And if I offend anyone, please, I apologize. I don't want to do that. But let's not romanticize the Islander, all right? It was a dive bar. It was a dive bar right up until it closed. And believe me, I had some fun nights there. I'm sure you did too, Doc. I know a lot of us did have some fun nights there. I think I know of at least two bars that have tried to make a go of it since. Something tells me there was a third one that I'm not thinking of. And they can make a go of it. And, you know, and it was talked about, you know, them hanging out in the back alley. Well, I played Little League ball. I'll age myself here, but it was like 40 years ago. And there was some boisterous, rowdy crowds that were hanging out on that back deck of the Islander. This has been, it's had a clientele that is probably, quite honestly, has never been too far away from homelessness themselves, right? Like, I'm trying to be honest here. I don't want to say anything mean. But getting to the feedback, and I want to thank our citizens, and I want to thank our business owners who wrote emails. They joined us on Zoom. I want to thank BC Housing for putting on the public information meeting. And I do hear the concerns and the fears, but at the end of the day, I don't share them, because simply put, most of the fears revolve around drugs and crime. And I don't believe that every homeless person is a drug addicted thief. I just don't. I do know that drugs and crime they do come with a certain section of the homelessness, but you know what? We just have to look back at the house on Dogwood, the house on Park Hill Terrace. We've had crimes and drug abuse problems in houses, not just with our homeless, right? It's going to be staffed 24/7. The entrance and exit is going to be on the alley side. It's not going to be on First. And if we're going to start getting into questioning the operation and everything else, I mean, BC Housing, the LRCA, they're well experienced in the area and they've been successful, right? We can allow them to do our work and assist our most vulnerable. If we do the math, 15 beds is 0.2% of our population. I believe that 99.8% of us can, you know, help this 0.2%, because, well, we've already, I mean, Dave Alton showed us, right, that doing nothing is not an option. It was unfair that Dave died the way he did, and it's really unfair if his death is in vain. So I just say, you know what, we're just being asked to provide. We're just being asked to allow an unused dive bar as a temporary place so people can have a safe and warm place to sleep. Place with I know and love, I think we can provide that. So I'll leave it at that. Sorry, it was a little bit long-winded. I get it, it's a difficult decision, but I'm going to support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. I'm looking at the attendees. I'm not seeing anyone from BC Housing. Oh, Sean's there. Okay, thank you. All right, so I can ask questions. I wasn't sure if my questions would be properly put to staff. So I've got a few questions, and if it's appropriate, I can do them through the chair to Mr. Rorson. Is that acceptable? Or should I do them through staff?
Well, I don't know.
Your worship.
It depends on the question, Ms. Smith.
Okay.
I was just going to say, Your Worship, Heidi Hartman will be representing BC Housing this evening.
Oh, okay. Heidi's there too. Thank you. Thank you.
And Vicky Stickwood Hislop is representing LRCA.
Okay, thank you.
If council were to have questions.
Okay, thank you.
And they can they, so for them to answer questions though, we need to invite them in, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So are your questions through staff, or do you have questions for the proponents?
Probably at least one of the BC Housing proponents, I would guess.
Okay, so I guess that's an invite to ask them to come in.
Okay, I'll ask Ms. Hartman to come in.
Hi, Heidi.
Good evening, Ms. Hartman.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good to see you, Heidi. I just want to say as a little preface that I want to thank all of the folks who wrote us letters. It's always nice to see correspondence come directly to us. I can't say that I agreed. I definitely can't say that I agreed with everything expressed in them, but I will say that I probably agreed with some element of every letter. And they were all very thoughtful. I want to particularly single out Chad Taranchuk for writing a very, I thought, thoughtful letter that really, I think, helped me myself hone in on the types of questions I wanted to ask. I'll preface a little because I have more of a background in what the current shelter looks like. It's certainly not a bad thing. It's a fabulous facility. It's got everything it needs. What the question here is, it lacks size, or apparently lacks size. So that whole infrastructure of a shelter, it has a whole, what I call intake architecture of cameras inside and out, separations, buzzers, panic buttons, all of that. In the terms of the temporary use permit, there's a section saying that structural changes to the inside of the building are not allowed. And I'm just wondering how you're going to bring about, essentially the same or better infrastructure in this new space in terms of all those safety things for staff and residents, and more importantly, perhaps in this context, ventilation.
Ms. Herman?
Thanks for the question, and I'm more the operations, so I'll do my very best to answer the question, Councillor Stevens. But it's my understanding, based on the Project Tech inspection, that we do not have to make any structural changes to the building, that we are just doing some minor renovations to incorporate best practice designs, like you said, the addition of security cameras, an intake center, and those kind of things. We are adding a shower for folks to be able to have opportunities to clean up. The other key piece to remember is that some of the services will still be operated out of the Rialto Manor, specifically the food programs. So there are very limited renovations and nothing structural, based on my understanding from our Project Tech inspection.
Okay, and
Thank
you. And when would we be looking at having the shelter like turnkey ready?
Thanks for that. We don't have a date, but we anticipate the very quick turnaround time. So we're anticipating within the next few weeks to early in the month of April.
That quickly to put all the infrastructure in and be resident ready?
That's
Okay.
my understanding. We've already ordered the pods. And those will be the sleeping areas and storage areas for the folks staying in the shelter. So that piece, they just have to be delivered and installed.
Oh, okay. And so, you're getting the numbers reports. I know at periods. In terms of the linchpin of this whole move is a capacity issue. So in the existing shelter, how many nights, and I have some raw data that was given to me, but I'm wondering if it's been parsed out better than I can do it. How many nights have people been refused service because the current shelter is not big enough?
Councillor Stevens, I'm going to have to defer that question to LRCA with regard to occupancy. But what I can say is that based on the conversations with the Ladysmith Resource Center and city staff, this request came forward from the to BC Housing that there was a need in the community to be able to increase the shelter bed capacity based on the need.
Okay, so I'll maybe give the questions to other folks and then come back around. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Jacobson and then Mackay.
Thanks. I do have a number of questions. So I guess I'll just kind of take my turn. We did get information that the capacity at the Rialto is cut back. What is that cut back to?
The current capacity is 4 to 5. It usually operates pre-COVID at 10.
Okay. And can I have a follow-up, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So it's my understanding that the proposed staffing for the new the property where for the TUP application is to be the same, but we're expecting up to a 15-person capacity. Now, I'm not quite sure. I did have some questions about the staffing at this, but now I'm looking at it and it looks like either one's quite overstaffed, which I doubt, and the other one's maybe really understaffed. Is that like, where's I'm struggling to see how the staffing at the Rialto is the same as the staffing when the population is expected to be triple.
Or, yeah,
So-
go ahead, Ms. Hartman, but the capacity at the Rialto is 10, not 5. It's just they're only 5 now because of physical distancing requirements, but go ahead.
Right, but there's still 2 on staff there at this time?
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Hartman.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Jacobson. The standard is 2 staff 24/7. I appreciate that the numbers of 5 to 10 may look different, but the staffing model is the same. We usually find that 2 staff for up to 35 is sufficient for shelter operation. Once it goes above 35, then we look at that. But I'd also like to qualify, Councillor Jacobson, that during the day, and we've got LRC here to speak to the staffing model in more detail. During the day, there are often more staff on site. There may be Island Health staff from the ACT teams coming and connecting with people. There may be community partners. There's also food services staff. So during the daytime, there tends to be more staff connecting with people, but overnight shifts, it is a minimum of 2 staff 24/7. And I can let you know, I just came from a meeting here in Victoria with one of the sites, and it's upwards of 50 beds. It's a hotel, and there are 2 to 3 staff at all times. So just to confirm, the standard is 2 staff 24/7, but that's the minimum.
Follow up?
Thank you for that answer. My next question is to the staff. We've received really sort of general information. I'm not looking for individual names or anything or any personal information about the staffing, but I am quite curious what times the security is going to be scheduled for.
So I'd have to put,
It's,
so
I guess
for
it goes to
question for staff?
LRCA. LRCA, I imagine.
Okay, I would put, we'll need to bring the representative in from LRCA. Ms. Smith?
Yes, bringing them in now. We're bringing in Vicki Stickwood-Hislop. And she can just unmute.
Hi, Ms. Stickwood-Hislop. So Councillor Jacobson, if you want to repeat your question.
Sure, thanks. When, what time of day, you guys have indicated that there is already a 3-shift rotation expected or set up. When will the security staff be on, and will it be a specific security person or someone trained specifically for security, or is it an LRCA staff member that maybe has a little, like some additional training in security?
Thank you for your question. We'll continue with what we have been using over the past few years with the shelter. And that is that the security inside the building is based on our staff. And again, that's why there are 2 members at all time. There are not external security people involved. That was only during the tent cluster site because it was an outside area, but because we're in an inside building and it's contained, we maintain it with our current or with our staff.
Okay, so what shift are you going to be putting the security on? Is it the overnight shift? Is it the first thing in the morning shift? I'm just curious.
Every shift,
will have specific security on?
Not specific. Every shift has 2 people, 2 staff, and they include securing the facility and the individuals within the facility.
Yeah, just like the existing shelters always operated.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have another follow-up?
Not on that particular.
Well, I can put you back on the list. Other members got a chance to speak for quite lengthy time, so there's lots of opportunity for everyone. I have Councillor Mackay and then Councillor Stevens, and I'll put Councillor Jacobson back on there. Go ahead, Councillor Mackay.
Thank you. And minor really questions for my own clarification so I can have a better understanding here, and just confirming things that I thought I understood but perhaps don't. So the Rialto facility will continue to function in the way that it's currently functioning, is that correct?
Sorry, I'll put that through to whoever wants to answer it from either staff, LRCA, or BC Housing.
Heidi, if you want me, I'll take that one. It will be a prep site and a facility that will have the showers, laundry, and the prepping of the food. There will not be any guests staying with us, any clients staying with us. They will all be over at the Islander or the Island Hotel.
Okay, so follow up.
Yep.
So then it's not a new group of clientele. It's the same group of clientele just moving into a bigger facility. It's not new faces. It's still just people that are organic to Ladysmith. It's not, we're not opening the door to other people from other communities. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Another question then, am I accurate in understanding that only the back door of the facility will be used, not the front door, the front steps?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And is it fair to assume that the person who's on doing security at any given point in time is keeping an eye on the back alley? Is that too much to be expecting, or do we need another person who would be dedicated to the outdoors, or is that what currently happens in the existing facility that's now too small?
They have a video feed that looks out to the outdoors, and that's how they monitor it.
Okay, thank you. So essentially it will be running the same as the existing facility, which is also currently on First Avenue, just a little bit further down the road.
It's off of First Avenue behind the Rialto, but yes.
Right, but the building is still there, just the same as it'll be accessed from behind, same as what's existing.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens, you're next.
Thank you. I wanted to come back to a point, and I think I know the answer, but maybe it could be expanded upon by Heidi or Vicky. In the TUP, it's listed as the types of employees, security guard with this association, whatever. Am I right to say that all of the existing staff are going to qualify under the last point, which I think was, it's a very sort of catch-all, like with experience in social services? There's no one who's a social worker working.
That's correct.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's for you, Councillor Patterson, because I do. So I just wanted to get back to the numbers.
Excuse me if I may, Councillor Stevens, but as I forget who pointed it out, during the day, we do have people from Island Health and a variety of support services coming in, and that would include, social services during the daytime.
Fair enough. So I wanted to get back to the numbers because, as I said, it's sort of the linchpin of this request is expanding the space due to too many people. Do you know offhand how many people have been refused service because? And I have some data that I think I know it came maybe from the LRCA or maybe from BC Housing. But to make it quick, is there a number of people who we know have been refused service since because there's not enough room in the shelter? to overnight?
As I pointed out in the report that we sent today, they do not keep track of those that have been deferred because of either there's not enough space or whatever their situation might be.
Okay.
But I think that about says
Okay.
it.
Well, the reason I ask is because this is the dangers of a philosopher doing data analysis here. So, because from the rough data that I see, from December 1st to February 7th, so 69 days, there were 11 nights where you were at 100% capacity. And so, so I'm assuming on those 11 nights that those would be the days that you would have had someone. Is it possible to parse out how many of those 11 nights you had too many people? I mean, I'm assuming you're not turning people down when there's 4, when you're at 80% or at 3. So that seems a relatively small number, and we could get that down. 1 is too many, but I'm just wondering what that number is, because I think it's the linchpin of all of this.
I'm looking at Heidi's hand, so I don't know if Heidi wants to take
I was
this.
going to go to Heidi after the asked and answered, but go ahead, Ms. Hartman.
Thank you. I just wanted to state that provincially, about 4 years ago, BC Housing ceased collecting data on people being turned away. So it's no longer a data capture point that we ask our providers to collect.
Okay.
Got it. It's not even anecdotally. We could comment on, you know, we don't even know from staff. Okay. I think defer at this moment. I may have another question or two, but
okay.
Thanks.
I will say that some of the feedback that I had received was that folks know that there's a capacity issue, so they're not actually coming because they feel they have an alternative place that may not be up to that standard. But you know, so if they feel like they're going to maybe turned away and they've got some place that's marginal for the evening, that might be where they choose to stay. But we'll come back to you. I have Councillors Jacobson and then Patterson.
Thank you. Much of the feedback we got, especially from business owners that are neighbors to this property, is concerns and experiences about drug use. My understanding from the neighborhood meeting held last week was that there are going to be lockers for individuals to store their personal belongings and any contraband that's not allowed inside the shelter, and that the individuals could access these lockers and their possessions without sort of interference, and they're coming and leaving. So I think, you know, without drawing a straight line, I think a bit of a concern is justified in that if there is contraband stored in those lockers, what is the monitoring? Is there any sort of policy or procedure for individuals maybe not bringing on to site, but storing and then taking a little wander down the alley and hopefully not choosing to use? But I mean, I don't think from the letters that we received, it sounds like there's some firsthand witnessing of this going on, and I'd like to see how that's going to be addressed and handled with this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know who to direct that one to. I think they're talking, Councillor Jacobson's talking about when somebody checks into the service, they check their bags, I guess, and then how that's managed.
And the contraband, if there is anything that is like not supposed to be on site, if it's known to be stored in those lockers, are you calling the police? Are the RCMP involved at that point for possession?
I would put that through. I can't even begin to unravel that because, yeah, that's a question to the proponent. I'll let you answer it and I'll speak to it when I get my opportunity.
Heidi, do you want me to take it? When someone comes into the facility, they are asked to put the contraband, if they have any, into a locker. And then when they're leaving the facility, these are their personal belongings. You know, we can call it contraband, whatever it is. When they leave the facility, if they were to go out, let's just say to have a cigarette for a few minutes, they're on video and we're watching them and they're back in again. But if they leave the facility, then obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but this is their personal property and they are to take it. It's not ours to go in and go through it. That's their personal. We have to remember that we have to give these people a sense of to want to come in, to get out of it, to be safe and secure and not have a barrier to have them come in to remain safe and healthy during this pandemic. And with that, we do not go through the contraband and refuse to allow them to take it back out again.
Well, I appreciate that fully, but we did receive a number of letters from locals who don't feel safe based on drug paraphernalia and break-ins and criminal activities that's already happening. So I'm just.
And I can appreciate that. And I think one of the things that we looked at, and I wasn't privy to it, but I understand that council might be privy to it or be able to get it, is when you look with the RCMP, and the shelter has been where it is, you know, a couple blocks from the Island Hotel, and whether there was any, you know, major increases that could be attributed to our clients. And my understanding is that that is not true. We understand also that in Ladysmith, there are other individuals outside of the homeless who do have access to paraphernalia, to contraband, who do frequent the back alley and that particular outside site. So to say, is it the homeless that we're housing safely inside, or is it others in the community? We don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. And that's something I think the community is actually working on together. I know our president, Jenica has been working, you know, with the chamber, with the, you know, the Downtown Business Association, asking people like the Sporty to get involved, to see how, as a group, as a community, we can work together to control the paraphernalia that's out in, be it alleys or on the streets.
I think my concern is that if it's already a vulnerable population, are we maybe putting them in a situation where it's not going to be helpful to them? I appreciate the housing need, 100%, but I share the concerns. I saw one of the late letters that came in today. My daughters walk around downtown quite regularly, and I've always felt safe sending them down there. And but I can't ignore these letters and everything that's come in from our First Ave business community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Patterson. And then I'll go after.
Okay, this discussion has just brought up a whole pile more questions, and everybody knows where I stand. First of all, I don't have a copy of the temporary use permit.
It's in the council agenda package. It's in your attachments, first attachment, Doug.
Well, maybe I didn't get the whole thing. I got all the letters, but I also, the lady, Vicky said that she sent a report in, and Councillor Stevens has it. I'm not familiar with that report. So I feel some of us are missing some stuff. I was under the impression when we were told there was going to be showers there, washroom facilities there, eating there, that everything, it was a one-stop shop. Now I'm finding out that the people are going to be sleeping there, but they're going to have to be walking a couple of blocks down the street to the cold weather shelter.
It's where the prep and stuff takes place, Doc. I'll put that through to Ms. Hislop or Ms. Hartman.
That's correct, Mayor. We're prepping the food at the Rialto site, and we'll be bringing it down to the island site, and they'll be eating within their own areas.
Okay, but they're going down. Now, you said there's a one shower in the island, but there's shower facilities and laundry facilities at the other site.
That's correct.
So again, there's going to be a need to to move from one to the other.
Yes.
Okay, I just a question for I forget the late, there's Ms. Hartman, and I guess the LRCA. Why was not the old hospital that has showers, cooking facilities, washrooms, separate rooms, medical staff, ambulance next door, separate entrance? Why was that not looked at when both BC Housing and Island Health are both supposedly have the interest of the overall community uppermost? Why was that not a site that was looked at?
I'd have to put that through. I can't speak to that. I know we don't have Island Health folks here, so that might not be fair to put those guys on the spot, but Ms. Hartman?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And we worked with our real estate department. We also worked with city staff who brought forward opportunities for looking at different options to open shelters. I can confirm the hospital was not something that we looked at. The sites that were brought forward, we reviewed, and this one presented the best opportunity to be able to open some shelter beds in a very quick turnaround time.
Well, everybody knows where I'm coming from. So just, I would really like to, I would like to table this and send it back to staff, LRCA, BC Housing and Island Health, because I really honestly believe that every member of council really can see that the hospital unit, the old hospital, has everything that is needed for these people. And I know you don't like me calling them these people, but these unfortunate people, and it will not have the impact that the potential impact that the Island Hotel will have.
Thank you. So I'm going to put myself in next, and then I have Councillors Johnson and Jacobson, and I think I saw Councillor Stevens' hand again. That gives me a few deep to go to before I call for the bench again. I'm trying to do this in the most respectful way I can, but I'm really surprised that the same sort of tropes that we hear again and again sort of get trotted out in these kinds of conversations, even though they've been disproven time after time. I read the correspondence as well, and I'm surprised at the level of correspondence on an anticipated facility when I frankly didn't receive any but one correspondence like this in the previous 12 months about drug paraphernalia and people found in back doorways. And I don't doubt that it's happening. However, statistically speaking, or if you look at the case studies that have been done, when these kinds of facilities come forward, it cuts down on those types of incidents. Because when people aren't sheltered, they will find a shelter place to bunk down for a night, whether it's in a bush or a back doorway. You know, speaking to people's personal belongings and anybody who spent any time in the harm reduction circles or even at a workshop or two knows that creating trust and a welcoming space for people is step number one to getting them into an opportunity to have a connection with somebody that can lead to better things. I know that through the shelter and through the tenting site that was temporary through the summer, we were actually fortunate enough to find a couple of homeless in our community, more stable long-term housing. And that shows again the opportunity that's presented by having a place where people can feel engaged and supported. I'm a business owner on First Avenue. So I understand the concerns that businesses have. I understand the concerns that folks have about you know, what an overrunning of your community can be when social disorder takes root. I think we can see it in neighboring communities on either side of us. Those situations are usually born out of a lack of attention over a long period of time. And what happens is when you don't take these kinds of interim steps as towards a better long-term solution, you end up with the kind of social disorder that becomes entrenched that you see in Cowichan, that you see in Nanaimo. Harm reduction circles, people will talk about this, whether it's about the human cost of alienating people, separating them, and the conversation always comes down to, for me, segregation versus integration. And I've always been a proponent of integration when we talk about people that are in less fortunate, troubling parts of our society. Segregating people only magnifies the problem. You push them away out of public view, and you create a zone where you're predominantly dealing with a social disorder issue rather than integrating it within the broader community, where regular citizens can sort of have that sort of passive security just by the nature of the amount of people. I spend a lot of time downtown, frankly, probably more than anybody except for Rob. And I spend time with these folks all the time. It doesn't matter if Don's yelling at me, and sorry, I shouldn't say names, but this is a different person not related to this issue. But folks in our community for a long time. I've sold art in my business for one of our homeless people at a time. At a better time for this person, to be fair. But the reality is that the most success that I've seen personally comes from supportive, integrated opportunities to create connections, create trust, and hopefully lead them to services. So, however, I'm, as Councillor Virtanen said, you know, in the past have been, ignorance is bliss. In other words, if I didn't see it, if it wasn't something that was affecting me day to day, I could pretend it didn't exist. When Dave died, that was a bit of a shock to our community, because we all know him and we're affectionately sort of connected to him over that time in his life. However, in the intervening months and years since 2013, we've done precious little. Counter to Councillor Virtanen's view of the situation, until I was elected, we didn't have a cold weather shelter, an extreme weather shelter. And I heard the very exact same tropes that I've heard tonight trotted out to oppose that TUP. And here we are many years later, and now we're saying, let's keep it there. It's fine there. But I just have to reflect on the exact same challenging questions were posed around that facility. And now we're saying that facility is good enough. What we've been told in the intervening time is that with COVID, for a short period of time, there isn't enough space there to comfortably accommodate people with the appropriate social distancing. And this is what BC Housing and LRCA have come forward with, a larger space to provide the same set of services. They've taken steps to acknowledge some of the concerns that people have around First Avenue by having the entrance and exit at the back door. But I'll tell you, every time I sit at those picnic tables that Councillor Patterson mentioned, 1 out of every 2 or 3 times I'm, if not sitting across from one of these folks in the neighboring table, they're in the general area where I am, going about their lives as they do every day in our downtown core. So whether it's letting them out onto the street at 7 a.m. behind the Rialto, or 2 blocks up behind the Islander, I don't think it's going to impact or create a view of social disorder that's being sort of put out here as part of the narrative in opposition to this. This is a temporary measure. It's clear in the TUP that within 90 days after the ending of the emergency order, that the facility will be removed and returned to whatever future, hopefully prosperous use it can be used for. But in the short term, I think that we can make a small sacrifice to say that we are going to support those folks that need a little bit more space to be sheltered, that we won't have to possibly turn them away because they perceive that there's not enough space and don't want to pack up their belongings from their existing campsite, whether it be in the woods, a back doorway, or out on a boat, to come in to be told that there's not enough room tonight, and to turn around and go find yourself somewhere else at 7 p.m. To bunk for the night. So as much as I am fully supportive of all the understandings and the misunderstandings of what these kinds of facilities will offer to a community and some of the challenges that they present, both historically and everything I've learned but in the last 6 to 8 years around this issue tells me that these kinds of facilities are the best first step we can take, the best interim step that we can take. And that although I don't believe this is an appropriate location for these folks, and I have the same concerns that Councillor Patterson has around the lack of action on a broader scale to address this more appropriately, in the interim, we've got a temporary measure that can help support our community, that will be supported by LRCA, who has experience in supporting this community within a community that we have in Ladysmith over the last 3+ years. And when the pandemic ends and the emergency order is lifted and we're down to 1 or 2 infections a day or a week rather than hundreds, this TUP will expire. The facility will be removed, and we can hopefully move on to a brighter future. So I do support the temporary use permit, in as much as it is a temporary use permit to address challenges presented by a COVID-19 pandemic. And with that, I'll go to Councillor Johnson, and then Jacobson, and then Stevens.
You may have noticed that I've been absent from the discussions because I wanted to hear what you all said. There's a lot of very good points that have been made. I think that Councillor Patterson's point about the consideration of the hospital is a very valid one. And I'm disappointed that it wasn't taken as a considered as an option. I appreciate the information that Vicki and Ms. Hartman has given us to help fill in some of the details. I have swung from position here to position there, position here, listening to your discussions, because you've all made very good points. The thing that I would like to see, and Councillor Patterson suggested it be tabled, I would be willing to table the motion, but I would like to know first how long it would be before it would come back and what detrimental effect it would have on the shelter.
Sorry, through to staff, I'd just like to understand what Councillor Johnson means by table the item.
But table to further meetings where we can have a full-fledged report as suggested by Councillor Patterson.
So you're talking about a referral motion to a future meeting with instructions to pursue the hospital as an alternative site?
That's one thing I would like to see if it gets a seconder.
Okay, well, we'll ask staff. Basically, that would take many weeks, I can only presume, to try and negotiate with Island Health, but I'll put that through to either staff or the proponent to be able to respond to. And then if you want to make the motion, you're welcome to do so.
Through the chair, I can provide some insight into the permitting. A TUP has certain notification periods, and then of course it has to be approved at a council meeting, which only occurs every 2 weeks. So essentially, any decision to defer the TUP adds at minimum 2 weeks, more likely 3 to 4 weeks, just in the permitting process, and add to that any time that it would take to engage in negotiations for an alternative site or to research alternative sites and so on.
So you're talking several weeks, because then we have to redo notice as well, would we not?
Through the chair, notice can actually, for a TUP, is a bit simpler than other types of permits, so it can usually occur within the council window. But essentially, short answer is assume 3 to 4 weeks.
And then if a different site was located, it would have to be a new TUP application, because it wouldn't be for the site that's been presented to us this evening.
That is correct, and terms would have to be worked out and agreed to. And so there would be quite a bit of extra time for that process in sort of application intake, if you will.
Okay, and no shots at BC Housing, but the only people harder to get this timelines compressed with might be Island Health. Sorry, that was just a little shot. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, I'd like to hear from Ms. Stickwood, Vicki, as I know her better, and Ms. Hartman as to what effect this would have. How drastic would it be?
Ms. Hartman.
I'm happy to speak to that. What I can say is we have been working with city staff and LRCA since the summertime on a site, so I would see a significant delay. I can tell you with my experience with working with Island Health that there are significant steps in order to enter into a license to occupy with them. So I would anticipate that we would be months away from opening up another shelter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll come back to Councillor Johnson if you're wishing to make a motion, or if you'd just like to continue the discussion.
I won't make the tabling motion because I don't like the delays and the effect it could have on people. I just want to let the business community know, because I'm a resident downtown and I live off the back alley. I have concerns, but I think the greater good is to support the motion. So I will be supporting the motion to issue the permit.
Thank you. I have Councillors Jacobson and then Stevens.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this would go to the LRCA or BC Housing. I'm curious about your exit strategy, given that this is a temporary use permit. Is there a property or a solution that you see in Ladysmith for permanent so that we wouldn't have to keep coming back to the TUP application? Also, are you thinking that you're going to need the bigger space beyond COVID, or are you thinking that after the COVID provincial restrictions are lifted, you will be moving back to the Rialto area, the existing shelter? And then I guess follow up to that would be, given that you anticipate it's going to take a while to speak with Island Health and get the license to occupy with them, is this something that you would consider for down the road, seeing as that it does seem like it's a pretty reasonable long-term solution facility?
So that's a multi-part answer. I'll put that through to, I guess, Ms. Hartman. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No worries. And I recall this question from the community engagement, and the same answer would apply, that once the pandemic, the emergency order is lifted and physical distancing isn't required, the Rialto could operate as it did before with its 10 beds. But, you know, BC Housing, we're always looking for opportunities. Our preference is to provide permanent housing solutions rather than temporary shelter opportunities, because that's where the big difference is made, when we have people with their own roof, their own independence, and bringing supports in.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the part two to that question was, would you consider pursuing conversations with Island Health? But what I'm hearing, if your answer was a full answer, was that you wouldn't be contemplating doing that, but just resuming service at the Rialto. Okay, thank you. Follow up, Councillor Jacobson?
Yeah, I appreciate that the end goal is permanent solutions, permanent housing solutions, which I think is everybody's end goal in all this. However, it seems like there's a never-ending need for individuals needing temporary housing solutions. So that's why I'm asking about the hospital, if that would be something that would be on your radar to pursue down the road, for rather than having to keep coming back for TUPs, and just have a permanent solution at that property, or at least examine it.
We're always open to working with community when they bring forward solutions. This, you know, it was the city, the town, and the LRC who brought this to BC Housing and proposed a solution. So we've worked with the community. We would continue to do that, Councillor Jacobson.
Thank you. Follow up?
One more quick follow-up then, I guess, to LRCA. Is the hospital site something that you guys would pursue if you are not finding that the just to avoid doing these TUPs over and over again? outside of COVID? It seems like it's a never ending need. So
Our role is that of operator, and it is between BC Housing and town to find and to make the solution. Obviously, we work with them. I think, as Mayor has said, this has been going on for a number of months. I think Councillor Stevens alluded to that too. We've looked at a number of facilities for I don't know how long, but obviously, and again, I can only look to Heidi for that. If there's a possibility to look at the island, or sorry, to look at the hospital, we would be open to whatever would be best for the clients, but we look to BC Housing into town to help us with that as operators.
So maybe to staff then, I guess, can we put the hospital on the radar?
That would be a discussion for council and direction for council to provide to staff. However, if you had just said this is an ongoing need, I would question whether the hospital site in a largely residential area would be the right place for a permanent shelter site. But again, that would be staff will do what we direct them to do. So if we have a council discussion and make a motion to have staff work with Island Health to look at the possibility of a shelter at the hospital, that would be council's prerogative. But I can put it through to staff if they want to add to that.
Thank you, Your Worship. The old hospital wasn't actually identified as something that was being pursued. It wasn't brought to staff's attention, and it wasn't something that was on BC Housing's radar through their real estate division. Basically, that we were looking at vacant buildings and also buildings that were for lease and of a size that could accommodate. So if Island Health has a vacancy, it's not something that they're advertising, obviously, but if council would like us to pursue something, we can. And would that be a temporary use?
Sorry.
Would that be permanent?
Ms. McCarrick, I think what she was saying was that if this is an ongoing need, is redoing TUPs at the Rialto, I think that's what you were asking, the right thing to do, versus a permanent shelter at the hospital site. Is that what you were asking?
If the facility is appropriate, then I mean, yes, it is in a residential area, but I mean, this is mixed use where it's going right now. So there's also lots of residential down there too.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that would be a council motion to ask staff to look into that. I think that maybe that's just a little bit outside this TUP application, but council can bring that forward and make a resolution to that effect to request that staff look into that. But that would be sort of an adjunct to this conversation. Okay, I will then go to Councillor Stevens next, and then Mackay, I believe, is after that, and then Virtanen and Johnson. And Patterson.
I was just going to say, I think this is the last time I'll speak, but I don't think I should make any hasty moves before having the rest of people speak. So I'll hold the last half. So I have one more question and then a couple of comments, and I'll lead to a motion, but won't quite go there. I'm looking at the stats, and again, apologies to Councillor Patterson again, that I have these and you don't, but so just the warming center use started on the 10th of December, it looks like the stats started. At that time, we all witnessed a tent going across the road and not immediate uptake in it. I'm just wondering, what do folks think, the regular clients, of this move? And are we going to see any lag in uptake or glitches in it and confusion between the two sites?
So the question first is, what do the clients think of it? Is that it, Orange?
I think that's it. Yeah. What do they think of this move now that it's out in the open and we're all discussing it and everyone's discussing it? Given, I'm just thinking of that slow to uptake in December, a record high rainy December, that slow uptake. What can we do to avoid that? Or and do we have any feedback at this point?
I think it would be curious if they were listening to us this evening, because this is maybe a good example of how you know, we at the LRCAA can't say to them, you know,
I meant in
"This is where
general.
you're going to
I meant in,
go."
gen-
You
I
know,
meant in
we can't-
general, day to day.
Yeah,
the
in
staff, yeah.
general, they're
Yeah.
looking for a place that they know is going to be there for them. They're looking for a place that they won't have to walk up to and there's only 4 beds, and that they're going to, you know, the opportunity to get in and stay warm is there. Similar to the tent site, Marsh, and
Yeah.
you know how successful that was. They're looking to know that one day is not going to be gone with no notice whatsoever. So I think they're looking to get back to the comfort that they had during the summer in the cluster site, but there's that loss of faith and this trust that's, you know, that we're slowly getting back over time. But I know when they are finally told where they're going to be going towards, and that it's going to be with them throughout this pandemic so that they will be safe and the community at large will be safe, that this is something that with good communication, we can get them to come in and stay safely.
Gotcha. Okay. And so I wanted to just pick up on what the mayor had said. We did have, as I started with, we had a ton of letters. More came today, more came immediately before this meeting, and I'm really aware of them. I also don't subscribe, as I said earlier, to certain sentiments in them, sort of textbook fallacies around it. One that stood out, and I just want to address it, is because it serves my next point, is that if you build it, they will come. And I don't think that's proven in any organized site. Yes, Discontent City was the exception because it wasn't like this. There wasn't the infrastructure set up to support it. So I don't believe that fallacy of the, but it is a double-edged sword. And I'll just say this, that I wish that there'd not been the reticence on giving us the numbers, because we have got a hell of a lot of pressure from letters, people making good points, people making bad points, but points nonetheless, and it would have made our job easier. I'm happy to weather that storm, especially in the case of fallacies, but the numbers are lower than I would have hoped to make the point that this is needed, and I wonder if that fallacy cuts both ways. That if we build it, will people in fact come? On the other hand, as I said earlier, one person being excluded is too much in my mind. So I'll tell you folks where I'm going, and then I want to let other people speak. If there hadn't been a whole speakers list, I would have moved the recommendation, but I'll tell you, I'm really nervous about section 4J of the TUP as it relates to my first question to Ms. Hartman about, I'll put it this way. I want to know that they're going to as good or better a place than they're currently in. And the content, and we're making about a 50% increase in footprint, 1,500 to 2,800 square feet. We're upping potentially 300% the number of people who are going to be in it. I want them to have good air, good security, good, all those things. And that serves the whole surrounding community. Many of the points that have been raised in letters that are valid points around, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about this, can be mitigated by that infrastructure. And the sections that say you can't do anything outside and you can't do anything inside, I'll put it to staff on how I can sculpt a friendly amendment to the TUP to mitigate that risk, that we hamstring BC Housing and their technical team, and they can't put the infrastructure in that addresses a lot of the things that people are nervous about. So that's where I was going. And then I'll say one last thing. The ultimate solution is supportive housing, and we don't have a huge population to deal with. Over the time that this setup buys us, we need to have a really frank discussion as a community. And I'll give informal notice about a motion, notice of motion for the committee of the whole in the future. That's what I say. I'll come back if you want to come back and make the motion.
Just to answer your question, are you talking about the structural modifications to the site? If you open that can of worms, this won't move forward. So you cannot make structural modifications to that building or require code requirements for the whole building.
It's not what goes, it's not doing anything that tears open a wall. I don't want that to cut both ways, that you can't put anything in, that you can't put a temporary wall in, because that's in effect structure.
That's not structural.
Yeah.
That's not structural.
I just want to be safe. That's my point. Those two sections are the
Sorry,
things
staff, if you could just maybe weigh in, because barrier walls, non-load bearing and stuff aren't structural. And my understanding with the building is any structural modifications would basically require a much bigger look at the entire building. So I just want some clarity around the structural notation in the TUP.
Through the chair, the structural alterations prohibition does not prohibit things like wiring, plumbing, those types of things. So as an example, installing a video camera system would not be considered a structural alteration. The structural alteration pertains to things like changing an exterior wall, replacing a roof line, and the condition wasn't placed in there because of code issues. You can build anything with enough fire separation and safety features. The provision was put in there because the building is a heritage building. It's on our heritage registry. And so we put the condition in to ensure that if BC Housing needed to change something that is a heritage element, they would have to come back to us and make a request. So there should be no issue with that clause preventing a facility that meets the operational needs of a shelter.
Thanks. Follow up?
I just want to, number one on my list is ventilation. Is it going to trip up the installation of ventilation that it's, as I concur with Councillor Virtanen, it's, you don't want them folks breathing bar air. And so is there anything that stands in the way, those conditions of installing a ventilation that is bringing fresh air in, which is key with the increase, the relative increase in population size, potentially, and the not so great increase in square footage?
Through the chair, no, reasonable wall penetrations and various alterations would not be considered structural alterations. We would have our building and fire inspectors closely involved in those changes to ensure code compliance and so on. So that may add a bit of time to the review, but it does not conflict with the TUP itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I have Councillors Mackay, Virtanen, Johnson, and Patterson. Have I missed anyone? There's only two of us left, or a couple of us left. Councillor Mackay, then Virtanen, then Johnson, then Patterson.
And I'll be quick. Just a couple of comments on things that have been said through the discussion. Firstly, there have been lots of letters, and I've read every single one, many of them twice. It's important to note, however, that there are also several letters of support for this. So it's not all one-sided, the letter writing. The other piece, two more things. The camera going into the outside to create security, that's going to be a more secure alleyway than it is currently. If it's got a monitored camera pointing out into the parking area, it's going to be, it's going to up the level of security, if you like. And the last one being, I don't know if anyone's been to the deep, dark corners of the hospital in recent years, but they're at full capacity in terms of what's going on up there. That's a full-on health unit. There's things going on in all of those rooms. And I think if you're thinking that there's spare rooms to use for a shelter, I think you're going to be sadly mistaken, especially during COVID when they're needing their space. So good luck. I don't think it's even close to a possibility. And
thank you. Councillor Virtanen, then Johnson, then Patterson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I was actually going to move the recommendation so you could put me after Councillor Johnson and
yeah,
Councillor
I'm not sure why this
right?
council tends to want to go on without moving a motion, but you have the legislative right to move a motion whether you're
All right.
first or last.
Okay, I was trying to be polite, and I will move staff's recommendation.
And we have a seconder. Councillor Mackay and Stevens. Councillor Mackay was first, so she gets on the agenda. And then I have councillors, did you want to speak to it, Councillor Virtanen, or do you want to? Okay, so I've got councillors Johnson, Patterson, and then Jacobson to close. Councillor Johnson.
My question is for Ms. Hartman, if I may. Ms. Hartman, BC Housing owns and rents out the Rialto Hotel or apartments, correct?
That's correct.
So they are paying a base wage or a base price to get into that facility. So what is the price differential that a homeless person would have to be able to get into the Rialto or a facility like that?
I would have to refer to the property manager. BC Housing has a property manager collect the rents for that property and send us a financial statement. That is something I could get back to you. But in terms of vacancies, my understanding is that vacancies are filled in a prompt manner. There's not a lot of vacancies, but potentially any of the residents who are staying in the shelter would need what you're terming, I think, is a rent supplement or a top up to be able to make it affordable for them to live there.
So,
sorry.
So what is BC Housing doing to help get top up so these homeless people can get into their own apartment or facility? Is it the fact there's none made, or that they are not willing to top up?
So actually Mayor Stone spoke, or Vicky may have spoke to some of the folks that have already received rent supplements and moved into market housing. So there are already examples of that happening in Ladysmith. I'm also aware of the property that will be moving forward, the community housing fund property that has some rents at shelter rate, which potentially folks from the shelter would be able to afford, and some lower income or rent geared to income. So it's a mixed community. So we are working within Ladysmith and want to create opportunities to have affordable housing options for everybody.
So it's not a question of lack of money, it's a question of lack of space, or is it both?
I believe that the rent supplements for the community are allocated, but we're always going forward to the provincial government to ask for more should there be need. Folks in community can always apply for the rental assistance program if they're a working family, or if they're seniors, there's the safer rent supplements as well.
So what I'm hearing you say, though, people who are not families or seniors, but are homeless, can't get the rent subsidy?
There are some rent supplements available under the Homeless Outreach Program for people who experience homelessness, yes.
Okay, wouldn't that be a better solution than putting them in temporary shelters?
If there are market rents available, I speak in a lot of communities, and I can say with low vacancy rates, it's unfortunately not always an option, even if there are rent supplements available. But that's definitely the work that the Shelter Society do when they have that opportunity to connect with people in the shelter. They have those conversations, you know, what is an individual housing plan that meets the needs of the folks in the shelter?
Very good. I appreciate your comments.
Wrong buttons. Councilors Patterson and then Jacobson.
Okay, thank you. You know, back in the early 90s when we had a hospital and the government of the day shut it down, they also took a lot of other services out of this town, like the probation, public health nurse, etc. What's in the hospital right now is a lot of window dressing stuff. And I'm damn sure that if Island Health and BC Housing were actually very concerned in the well-being of these people, they could expedite the discussions and put the well-being of these people before their own personal agenda or their own corporate agendas. There is lots of room in the hospital for 10 to 15 people. You might have to move some offices around, but there's the whole downstairs, as well as what used to be the maternity wing. So if we have these quasi-government operations that are concerned about people's health, and I hope the media are paying attention to this, because so far all we've heard is that BC Housing is not concerned about the outcome. They're just trying to find a place to put these people. And Island Health, it's going to take them too long to be able to sit down and change their agenda so we could have people living in better conditions. My question is Ms. Hartman, you mentioned that LRCA had approached BC Housing, yet LRCA says that they are just the operators. So I'm not too sure whose initiative this is.
Read the agenda, Councillor Patterson. It's a BC
No, I'm just going on what Ms. Hartman said.
It's a BC Housing application from BC Housing for a temporary use permit with LRCA as the operator.
Yes, but she said that BC House or LRCA approached them.
Sorry, I put that through to staff. I'm not sure that's appropriate for the my understanding was that the ask of BC Housing was because the shelter site was shutting down, we didn't have an appropriate indoor location, and we could have looked at bringing the little 8x8 cubicle housing like they've got in Cowichan to the Buller site, but that an indoor site would be preferred. But I can put that through to staff or to Ms. Hartman if she's comfortable answering that question the way it was posed.
I can provide some insight on the application, Your Worship. A temporary use permit application has to be made by the owner of the land. So in this case, the applicant is the owner of the islander. BC Housing has the authority of the owner to apply as the applicant. So it's really, it's just a series of technicalities as to who is actually applying for the permit. Ultimately, the permit will be issued to the landholder and it will run with the land, or the landowner, I should say.
Okay.
Well, that's not an answer at all to my question, but I'm just going to leave it. I just hope that Island Health and BC Housing and the provincial government and the federal government get off this pawning everything off on municipalities to take the brunt of it and sit down and come up with a solution, because even temporary housing is not a solution to a problem that involves mental illness or addiction. So I'm just going to leave it.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobson.
I didn't have anything.
Any further speakers on the item? Motion's been moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillors Jacobson and Patterson opposed. The motion carries. I just want to thank BC Housing for all of your patience, for our staff and BC Housing staff and LRCA for the months of work that they put in. I know it's a challenging time and a challenging circumstance, and respect to all people on all sides of the debate, because I think ideally, as Councillor Patterson summed it up, we need long-term solutions to address these issues, not these band-aids. But I will say, in my short time as mayor in 6 years, I've seen us gone from nothing to something, and that means that we're on a pathway to get to where Councillor Patterson and I think we would all agree need to get to actually appropriately address addictions, mental health, and homelessness issues within British Columbia. But as slow as it's been going so far, we are on a path, and I appreciate everybody's work around that. All right, so we'll be moving on. Ms. Hartman, thank you again. Ms. Stickwood Hislop, I appreciate your time this evening. So have a good evening, and we'll be in contact soon. All right, I'm just going to call a 5-minute recess. We'll be back at 8:40 p.m. to resume our agenda. I have to go to the washroom. Appreciate the patience there, folks. Do we have Councillor Patterson's there too? If everybody's back, we can resume. I don't think we've actually stopped the stream or anything, so I think we have everybody here, right? Sorry, I saw Councillor Johnson. Did you say something, or was it because your microphone's muted?
I just said it looked like we had 8.
Yeah, so I think we're okay. We can resume. So next item on our agenda is our committee minutes. The first one is the Public Art Task Group. And the recommendation is that council receive for information the minutes of the December 3rd, 2020 and January 7th, 2021 meetings of the Public Art Task Group. Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Any discussion on those? Seeing none. Mr. Goodall wants to speak to it. No, he's just getting set up. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Moving on to Community Planning Advisory Committee minutes, and the recommendation is that the council receive for information the minutes of the February 3rd, 2021 meeting of the Community Planning Advisory Committee. Councillor Mackay, did you want to speak to this?
Thank you. I just would like to make sure that everyone does have a look at the minutes from these meetings and in all of the meetings, in fact, that we have, our committee meetings that come back to us. The topics that are often talked about specifically at the CPAC meetings are not items that have necessarily come to the council table or even to the committee of the whole agendas, but they do get discussed and they're a bit of a lead in for us. So if we take a look at what the discussions go on at these meetings, then it's a good background for us then when we come to the table to have our own discussions on them. And it does give you a bit of an indication as to what the committees are landing on in terms of their feelings and their input. Lots of times they have very specific input. So I mean, yeah, it's self-evident if you take a look at the minutes, but if you don't take the time to look at those minutes, you're missing all of it. So it saves the discussion in any detail until the thing comes to our table, but make sure that we're staying aware of all of the things that come through in those committee meetings, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I'll assume they're moving receipt of those minutes?
Absolutely.
Seconded by Councillor Stevens. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? None opposed, I think. Motion carries. Sorry, I just froze. I don't know if it's me or everyone else. Can everybody hear me? Okay, I did freeze though, right? Because usually you don't all freeze at the same time. Okay, moving on. Reports, item 8.1, CVRD, OCP, and rezoning. Referral for 4760 Brenton Page Road. Recommendation is the council direct staff to send a letter included as attachment A to the February 16th, 2021 staff report in response to the December 23rd, 2020 referral from the CVRD seeking comments on an application to amend the CVRD OCP and zoning bylaws for 4760 Brenton Page Road, also known as Page Point or Manana or any of its other former names. So that's the motion in front of us. Hopefully, before I get a motion, I have a question through to staff. I was quite surprised to see so much in our referral letter referring to our OCP, which has very little bearing on the OCP of our neighboring regional district, and very aware of this property specifically, why our letter would seem to dissuade or discourage redevelopment of that long loathing site in our harbor, which is directly across from Ladysmith, not our jurisdiction, obviously, but a jurisdiction or a property that could well use this kind of investment. So my question is, why would we be imposing our policies in our letter on an OCP referral from a neighboring jurisdiction?
Through the chair, your worship, in the absence of a regional growth strategy, the town's only official planning document on regional growth is its OCP. So it is fairly common to revert to, because it is our only official planning document or the official planning document, is fairly common to refer to that document in terms of how to respond to regional referrals.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Patterson next. I should make it clear that I won't support this letter going forward, but if that's what council chooses, I appreciate that. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with you totally. You know me and the official lingo. What I would like to see us do is the second paragraph. 1, 2, 3, fourth line down, ends boundaries. Please consider the following statements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the quotes omitted from that. I like the last paragraph where it says, if the proposed bylaw amendments move forward, the town would like to emphasize the importance of protecting Ladysmith Harbor. In particular, please ensure that adequate servicing, et cetera, et cetera. But that part that refers to ROCP and what we think that they should be doing, I would like that omitted.
Thank you. Did I miss any other hands on this? Councillor Stevens?
I would move that recommendation in line with what Councillor Patterson has just stated. Just sculpting the letter a bit.
Yeah, so I would say that basically Councillor Patterson and Stevens, if you're moving this, you would omit after the word urban containment boundaries and then take out that final sentence of that paragraph and the reference to our OCP and keep the final paragraph saying if the proposed bylaw, et cetera, et cetera. That's what Councillor Patterson's thumbs upping.
Yes.
And so you're moving that?
Yes.
Okay, and that's seconded by Councillor Patterson's thumb. What's left of it? I can support that. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, we have a move and second motion. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson, you're still muted.
The only thing that I would like to see emphasized in any letter is our deep concern over pollution of the harbor, be it from fuel docking or sewage or whatever. That we accept the plan, but we wish they do everything possible. That's all.
Thank you. I think that is kind of said in there, but I understand what you're saying. I don't believe this proposal actually refers to the PID, which the marinas included. So although I understand your point, I think this is just for the, we'll call it the upland, but the backland on the backside there along the roadway. So I don't believe this is affecting the PID number where the actual marina is.
No follow-up?
Yeah.
Yeah. They say they're putting a water treatment and sewage treatment plant in. I just want protection in case the sewage protection or sewer plant malfunctions or something, because it's our harbor versus shared harbor.
Just trying to see how we could fit that in there. If you want to move an amendment, that would be in order, but you'd have to kind of come up with the amendment. Right now, it says that town would like to emphasize the importance of protecting Ladysmith in Ladysmith Harbor in particular. Please ensure that adequate servicing is available, provided for the development. We note that providing on-site water and wastewater services as proposed may be challenging. Component 16 units, existing commercial development, relatively small parcel size. So that's noting they cannot discharge into the ocean, Councillor Johnson. So if they have an event there, it will be on land and probably some sort of a retention mechanism. But do you find the letter will address your concerns suitably?
I think so. The only other question I have is I'm assuming the First Nations will be doing a similar.
The referral will be to Staminas First Nation as well. They'll get a separate referral.
Thank you. That's adequate.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. So the report did make mention that the closest stream body is suspected of being contaminated by substandard properties with at the weeping beds of them. So I'm thinking the age of this property, that what the infrastructure that's there is not great, and that this would definitely be an improvement. And then just as a general comment, I mean, desalination and such density, huge challenge, all the power to them. But I'm happy to to send what we're sending, to send a message and to say that Godspeed, I guess. Thank you.
Should we sign the letter with that at the
Godspeed.
end? With Godspeed. Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Moving on to the FCM grant award. So Uplands Remediation, the recommendation is that council authorize mayor and corporate officer to sign the FCM Green Municipal Fund Grant Agreement GMF 17055 titled Uplands Environmental Assessment and Remedial Action Plan for remediation of town-owned property referred to as the Uplands in the Waterfront Area Plan. Moved by Councillor Virtanen, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Any discussion other than yes? Well, that was one grant we hope to get to offset some of our own expenses. So not seeing any hands, I'll call the question then. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Smith, did you get the mover and seconder on that? Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if I did, so I'm glad you did. Moving on, adjustments to water billing accounts. The recommendation is the council approve the adjustment to utility account 0260000 in the amount of $3,206.83 due to a water leak occurring during the October-December 2020 quarterly billing, and approve a second adjustment to utility account 1066000 in the amount of $7,218.56 due to a water leak occurring during the October to December 2020 quarterly billing period. Moved by Councillor Mackay. Sorry, seconded by Councillor Stevens. Discussion. Councillor Stevens and then Patterson.
Oh, just a question. And if there are no details, in some cases when we get these huge water leaks, there's some details from staff around what went wrong. I'm really intrigued how $7,000 worth of water went into the ground. If there's no details, that's fine. But if there are, a précis of those would be great.
Through staff.
The chair, it was a break in the main from the meter to the house. That's all the details we received.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those, oh sorry, Councillor Patterson. You're up.
I'm just trying to find my paper on this. Not the second one, the $7,200 one. Is this not the second break that they've had? And I was just asking, a question for staff, if it was the same issue.
Through to staff?
No, it wasn't the same issue. The first one was just a relatively minor water leak, not as big as this one, where we've seen the proof of them digging up the main between the meter and the house to deal with this large issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Moving on to correspondence, item 9.1, letter of request, request for a letter of support from TELUS, and that the recommendation is that council consider providing a letter of support to TELUS as requested in the correspondence received February 8th, 2021 from Brian Gregg regarding Universal Broadband Fund grant application. Councillor Patterson. You just moving the recommendation? You're muted, so I couldn't hear what you said. I was reading your lips.
I moved.
I thought you were saying terrible things.
That's what I'm doing. You'll catch me one day.
So the recommendation would be that council provide a letter of support to TELUS and the following. Okay, seconded by. So just to be clear, I'll wait till I get a seconder, Councillor Virtanen. These are the big telcos can apply to this fund, and it's generally only them that qualify for these large grant applications for broadening their broadband footprint. So this isn't an assistance to business. We're not providing them anything special. It's just they seek local government support for those kind of deployments within their communities, and it's been making the rounds throughout the island. Any discussion? Councillor Johnson.
Rogers, they supply broadband also. Is there an indication that they want a letter of support in the future themselves? Or how do we choose one over the other?
We don't. If they came to us with an application under the Universal Broadband Fund looking for an application, we would judge it just the same.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Mrs. Smith, I believe that takes us to question period.
Yes, Your Worship. We have a few questions. One email, probably some of the questions have been answered this evening, but we did commit to read them out. So question 1, this is from Dirk Featherstonehow and Inez Braz. Question 1 is, were there any other options considered for a homeless shelter other than the proposed location that sits right in the heart of the downtown business district?
Without disclosing them, I can say for certain that there were several other locations that were considered, but didn't make it through the initial valuation. And just, yeah, that's it. I can get into my own thoughts on all the reasons why other sites didn't work, but this is the site that was settled on and brought forward.
Okay, question 2, given that the BC government has extended the COVID-19 lockdown more than 20 times, what guarantee does the community have that this homeless shelter will not become a permanent fixture?
The TUP has an expiry date, not just when the emergency ends, but I believe it is 1 year, or when the provincial state of emergency ends. So whatever comes first.
Question 3, if the shelter is not a permanent solution, what are the council's plans for the homeless residents after the temporary use permit has expired?
Well, we do know that the other shelter will resume operation when it can assist folks without the need for social distancing. However, it's been remarked that in addition to the project, which I don't think will address the needs of a certain population of folks that we already have in the community, we need to continue to find a housing. I will say that 2 very well-known members of our homeless community have found permanent housing and are no longer on the street, and we'll continue to work with LRCA, BC Housing, and anybody else who's going to come forward in a constructive way to help us solve that challenge.
Okay, the 4th question, if the temporary use permit is approved, will the facility be used by residents of Ladysmith, or will it accept overflow from other communities?
It's only intended, I understand, for residents in our community that are already known to LRCA, much like the tent site and the existing shelter is run.
And the last question, if approved, how does council propose to deal with the usual attendant problems of homelessness, mental health, and drug addiction?
Well, I don't think if we had this answer, we'd probably be having a larger conversation, but I will say that there's been progress, and I know that folks may not see that, but we have differing opinions. But in my experience, there has been progress. Just speaking about the couple of folks that I know have found permanent housing just since last summer shows that progress. However, I think it's also fair to say that the concerns that folks have around drug abuse and mental health issues, I prefer to separate them, although I know they're often tied to homelessness. The homelessness issue is easier to solve than the drug addiction and mental health challenges. And those are often the folks that are the ones left that need some other types of supports. Right now, we don't have low barrier, appropriately serviced housing in our community for that type of person going through those kinds of challenges. So we need to continue to work on that. In the interim, we've been running the extreme weather, cold weather shelter during the winter times. In the summer, largely, folks in that kind of a position end up moving out to somewhere else, typically in the bush. We hear about it more in the summertime, about this group found in the bush. And until we can find them permanent long-term housing or appropriate supports, that will likely what continues to happen.
Then the last question was from one of our attendees this evening, Chad Taranchuk. And his question was, I would like to know if the shelter would consider allowing drug and alcohol consumption inside. If not, why, and where would they suggest someone struggling with addiction consume? Why not allow shelter residents to bring drugs and alcohol inside?
Yeah, I'd have to speak to BC Housing and LRCA. I think that kind of a facility does need special higher training, higher professional level of supports. We are not a safe consumption site, and I don't think that we are, nor do I believe LRCA, it's my opinion, is equipped to handle that challenge. But that's a conversation we can have. But I will say, very much like some of the letters that I read today, I know that whether it was the hospital site or others in our community, when you talk about safe consumption sites and that type, it's even more difficult conversation to have than we're having around a potential up to 1 year use of an existing site in the town. So I'd absolutely advocate for that conversation to continue, but I know that at this point, the temporary use at the shelter doesn't support that activity.
That's all the questions.
Okay, and any from our attendees in the meeting still? I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Patterson. This is question period for the chair. Did you want to leave the meeting and come into question period? Councillor, go ahead, Councillor Patterson. I have a question from the floor.
No, because if I left the meeting, you would turn me off. Anyways, tonight is one of those discussions that in the time that I've been on council, we haven't had that type of subject that really pulls at people's feelings. And for some of us, I guess probably getting out of it not feeling as great is probably what we should. But I would really, really like to see us have it on a very, very soon agenda or our next CAL meeting to start the discussion of how municipalities, because it's not just us, but to get the higher levels of government to start moving on the mental health and addictions aspect of homelessness.
No, I would agree, and you have my commitment that we'll put that on the next agenda.
Okay.
And I think that honestly, I think it's incumbent on us to start bringing some folks forward that can talk to us about pathways to get out of this sort of cycle that we're on of like Band-Aid solutions.
We're not on that cycle, Mayor. Sorry for interrupting and carrying the meeting on.
I mean, as a country and as a province. Sorry, pardon me?
We're being strung along. We're having to come up with stopgap measures that I honestly do not believe are our responsibility. Looking after human beings is everything.
Okay, I'm giving you a lot of latitude here, Doc.
Okay.
But we are at the end of our agenda. I would just say in response to that, this is not our temporary use permit. This is not our operations. This is not our staff.
No.
This is an application that came forward. And I agree with you 100%. This is not the answer. It's a temporary mitigation of the issues, right? So we'll have a bigger conversation. I think people will get a better sense of all of our feelings about these issues in that kind of an environment. And I think it's a constructive conversation to have. So I appreciate that. And I do appreciate all of you. I wish we didn't have to deal with this issue. And to our community, if anybody's watching it or wants to, quote me on Facebook or whatever, nobody around this table, staff, LRCA, anybody wants to have to deal with these challenges in our community. We're all just trying to make the best we can of it. You know that as a business owner, I support your perspectives as other business owners around the challenges. This is not a solution, it's a mitigation measure, and I think it will provide some mitigation, and we'll have to try and move forward in better ways to solve these issues in the long term. And on that point, Councillor Patterson is 100% correct.
Oh, did you hear that, Trace?
Sorry, excuse me, just got to mute there. Thank you. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Stevens, seconded by Councillor Mackay. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Council, we do have to return to closed session, so just stay here, please, because we ran up against our deadline. I didn't adjourn our closed meeting appropriately.
So your worship, if you can just give me a few minutes, I'll stop the YouTube, the live stream,